Our next presenter has a talk entitled Revel in the Physical. And I have to tell you, Ayoka Chenzira, I became familiar with her work back in the mid-'80s. Yes, exactly. Give it up. I mean, you just have to. When you... Some of you, like me, in the mid-'80s, saw Hairpiece and were just amazed that there was, in fact, an African-American female animator and that she had something profound to say about what we do with our hair in particular and how we love it and how we treat it. So I was amazed by that, but she goes so far beyond that. You can't put her into any one category. She's not an African-American animator. She is a filmmaker across so many different genres. She's also an educator. She's a writer. I could go on and on and on. But today, she's going to share with us, as I said, an opportunity to revel in the physical. Please welcome Ayoka Chenzira.
Good afternoon. How many of you spend a lot of time online? Come on. Yeah, I do. I'm on my social media pages, I'm collaborating with colleagues, I'm playing with avatars, I'm writing a little bit of code. And at the end of the day, I've gone very deeply down these digital rabbit holes. And when I pull myself out of them, I turn around and I'm always surprised to see staring at me my stuff. I mean, the stuff on my desk, the stuff on my walls, the stuff on the shelves, the stuff on my feet. My stuff is like everywhere, and it's messy. It's not like being online. It's a totally different world. It's like me and my stuff, and it's staring at me. And I'm sort of staring back at it, because I'm so surprised to see it there, and I'm wondering, why is it staring at me? When my daughter was about 6 years old, she was very annoyed with me one day. And she took her little hand and she put it on her little hip and she said, I know a lot more about you than you do about me because I lived inside of you for 9 months. This kid could be very cheeky. It was not always appreciated. But it got me to thinking, does our stuff know things about us? Does my stuff know things about me? I mean, a lot of the stuff has been with me for a very long time. And the interesting thing about my stuff is that it doesn't matter if I made it or someone gave it to me or I found it in another country. My stuff looks like me. It feels like me. So here's what I mean. Everybody, just look at your shoes. Come on, look down at your shoes. Look at the color, look at the texture. Are they scuffed? Look at the heels. Now, look at the person next to you. Look at their shoes. Are those your shoes? I'm not talking about whether you want those fierce pairs of shoes or not. I'm just saying, there's something about their shoes that's different than your shoes, and you recognize that differentness. Yes? Okay. So, I got to thinking that stuff has meaning. It has a history, it has a meaning. And so the kind of history and meaning I'm talking about has nothing to do with the manufacturing process. It's not about where it was made, when it was made, or how it was made. So for example, documentary filmmakers and ethnographic filmmakers know that if you're interviewing a subject and you say, tell me something interesting about your life, which of course they would never do because that's too broad of a question. But basically, if you ask people to start talking about themselves, they really don't know where to start. They don't know what the entry point is. But if you say to them, can you tell me about that thing, that object that's on the counter? Or can you tell me about your favorite object in your house? Suddenly, the narratives come pouring out of them. And they might say something, oh, yes, like that teacup over there. That was the teacup that my grandmother was holding the day she decided not to marry the man who asked her, but to marry my grandfather, who never really asked her. And she dropped the teacup, and that cup right there that has that crack that goes around, and they start telling you this story and telling you this story and telling you this story. So with our stuff, as we touch it and move it, and it sits on our desk, sometimes we're not touching it, it's just very comforting. And as we touch it, we are imprinting our patterns of behavior on our stuff. And it begins to age with us. It changes shape, for example. It begins to fade, it begins to crack, but it's always kind of there. And we know our stuff, we recognize it when we see it. So I'm imagining that stuff has memories and it has dreams. Like, we talk about our stuff, but I think our stuff knows a lot about us as well. Have you ever one morning stood in your house and you couldn't find your car keys, and it's like, I know you're here somewhere, where are you? Like, you're expecting your stuff to go, hey, I'm over here, because you have this relationship with your stuff. And I imagine too that stuff even has attitude, that it can be as cheeky as my daughter. So let me give you an example. Last week I was at a party, at a luncheon, and I had a great time. And then I left and I went in my car and I'm driving, and I was like, oh, I forgot my sunglasses. So I drive back, I run in the door, and there my sunglasses are sitting on the table. And as I'm approaching my sunglasses, I kid you not, they're looking at me like, really? Like, we've been in a relationship for a very, very long time. Did you really just leave without me? And then I get defensive. I'm like, oh, no, wait a minute. We have been in a relationship for a very long time. You saw me getting up to leave. Like, why didn't you move closer or do something? So my stuff has a bit of an attitude. And sometimes I think about all the stuff on my desk, like late in the morning, I'm a nighttime person, and late in the morning I finish writing at 3 in the morning, and I imagine I'm going to bed and my stuff is on my desk just saying to the pens, so, what did you all write about? But luckily, I have a confidentiality agreement with my pens, and they're not allowed to talk to anybody. So, there are three events that got me thinking deeply about our stuff and memories and dreams and how they're embedded in our stuff. The first is Hurricane Katrina and the broken levees. And like many of you, I saw the televised programs where people's stuff was just gushing down the street. Their memories and dreams and hopes and things that they had given their life to and sometimes their life for, just gushing down the street. And simultaneously, there were these images of how those people were being dealt with. In some cases, in too many cases, they were being dealt with as though they were less than human or not human at all. The second event that got me thinking more deeply about people and our stuff is the massive foreclosure crisis. When all across America, city after city, neighborhood after neighborhood, we saw people's stuff just on the street, pieces missing, pieces spread apart from each other. You'd have a headboard here and the mattress way down the street, just dumped. And sometimes the stuff would be moved to a new home, temporary home if it were lucky, and sometimes it just stayed there waiting for the trash collector. And again, it's people's memories and dreams, and many of us drove by or walked by and looked at the stuff and judged the people. And sometimes we walked by and ignored the stuff as though somebody's history, somebody's stuff on the sidewalk was just the most normal, everyday thing. The third event was the death of my mother. When I got the news that my mother had passed away, I immediately went and took care of all the things that one has to do during that very difficult time. And at one point I found myself sitting in her living room, surrounded by all of her stuff. And I'm looking at this stuff, and a lot of the stuff I know from my childhood. But suddenly I'm looking at it quite differently. suddenly I'm seeing these patterns emerge, and I realize through my mother's stuff that there were things about her that I didn't realize when she was alive, all through her stuff. And suddenly I began to understand her a lot more and wish I had put together these pieces a lot earlier. My mother was extremely eccentric. Up until the age of 78, she rode a bicycle up and down the streets of a major city, and usually in high heels. And some of you in the audience know this about her. And she said to me, and I'm just a child, "You young girls don't know that athletic wear makes your body look ugly and sneakers make your legs look ugly. And there is no reason to be ugly. If you need some hair, buy it. If you need a leg or an eye, get it. There is no reason to go without." So as a kid, this is not an easy personality to take. And then I'm looking at the stuff and looking at the stuff and looking at the stuff, and suddenly it dawns on me that my mother was some kind of, and the words are coming, and it comes up, warrior / performance artist. And I'm going like, what? And out of the corner of my eye, I see this flash of red, and it's a pincushion. And it's a pincushion that has been with my mother for over 60 years. And I remember it very well. It used to sit on our dining room table, which also served as my mother's sewing table. It used to sit on her lap when she hand sewed and talked to her sister, usually about me and something incorrect that I had done. Or it would be at my feet when she was hemming my Catholic school uniform and turn and turn and turn and turn. And by the way, the Catholic school uniform looked nothing like anybody else's Catholic school uniform. And my mother would take these Vogue patterns and rework them. And suddenly there'd be this outfit that was, through a child's eyes, the most strangest, embarrassing thing that I had ever seen. And I'd walk down the street holding her hand, but trying not to, and just like cringing. And she would just be proudly walking in her clothes. And I would go, "Oh, God, please let me go home." And then I looked at this pincushion, and I suddenly realized that this pincushion that had been with my mother before I was born probably knew a lot about her. I could only imagine the stories that it had to tell. And so I began to think of all the situations that I knew the pincushion had been in. And suddenly, again, this notion of this warrior performance artist kept coming to mind. And I didn't understand exactly what that was about. But I knew that there had to be a way to begin to pull the memories from objects. And so when I was at Georgia Tech in the Synesthetic Media Lab, which is run by Ali Mazalik, I started experimenting with these interactive digital media tabletops. And the one in Syn Lab is very, very large. And one thing about me as an artist, I need my work to be accessible, and I need to be able to take the tools of my trade onto a plane and share them with other people. That's very important to me. And so I started building versions of the interactive digital media tabletop, first in cardboard and then with other kinds of fabrics. And I was working mostly with sensing technologies and trying to figure out how I could track objects and how you could move objects on a table and they would begin to open up and the flood of memories would start to come out. And so I started to construct these tabletops, these portable tabletops, as a place for the objects to land and begin to tell their stories. And so one of the first ones that I constructed was one that looked a little bit like my mother's vanity table. And if you began to work with this vanity table and move the objects around, it would tell you things about my mother. And so, as the pincushion began to talk, it actually began to visualize, and images came up, and I imagined the kinds of things that it had been through with my mother. So this idea of the warrior performance artist, for the first time I realized through the pincushion that my mother was in conversation with a world that was very cruel and very violent to her at the time. That she was wearing body armor that both protected her and pushed back at a world that had created a lot of myths about her and that would not allow her full access to the larger society. That this was her way of saying, I am here, you will see me, I will not be moved. And this was the warrior performance artist that I learned about. And as I thought about my mother's life over the years and all the places that the pincushion had been with her, I thought over and over and over again how it is that our ordinary stuff and ordinary people's lives actually tells extraordinary stories about who we are as a people. And as much as I love my digital life and all the things that I do with interactivity and being online, I still know deep in my heart how important it is to be able to look at another human being, to look them in the eye, to feel them breathe, to feel their presence, to smell them, to share a meal with them, and to listen to them talk about their stuff, about what's important to them. Because we need to develop sympathy and empathy and love and care. We need to touch people. When I was a child, in science class, we would build these little boxes, and I'm sure you did too, and you'd put something kind of strange inside and you cut a hole, and you'd put your hand in, and you were so scared to do so because you didn't know what was going to be. But as soon as you realized that you recognized what it was, you were less afraid. In a world that is increasingly becoming more xenophobic, we need to know about people's stuff and hear their stories and feel them and have sympathy and empathy, and it tells us a lot about who we are. Because at the end of the day, it's not just stuff. Thank you.
I can't help but to think that any warrior performance artist is obviously transcendent without even having to make any effort to be transcendent. The only thing I wanted to ask before I let you go is, you know, stuff can be very individual, but you were speaking to it being somewhat a part of a community, and that people need to kind of get beyond the boundaries of thinking of it as being individual. So I'm just wondering, what are some of the ways that we can do that with each other?
Well, I had designed this interactive digital media piece on one of my tabletops, which is called Making Beauty. And it occurred to me that not just my mother, but a lot of women of all kinds of backgrounds during a particular time made things in the home. They made beautiful things because the lives of women for the most part were so restricted. And so when we look at these kind of beautiful handmade things in women's home, we're really looking at a community of women and how they are talking about their lives and pushing back at the world. So in that sense, there's a tremendous sense of community.
Well, let's keep it going. Thank you so
you.
much,
Good to
Ayoka
see you.
Chenzira.